of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Hi everybody, welcome on behalf of Pakhuis de Zwijger, Arkham, the livecast here, Facebook, and also the viewers on Salto TV. My name is Indira van 't Klooster. I'm the director of Arkham and also the moderator of tonight. And today we're doing the 19th edition of Architecture Now, which focuses on architecture design and how architects also shape the city and future cities. And today, this is the first of 3 editions which focus on the question on how architects can contribute to a new feeling of home, on inclusive communities, on building homes and neighborhoods. Today, we try to find an answer to that question with Adeola Enigbokan, who is here calling in from Mexico City. Good morning, Adeola.
Good morning.
And also with Laura Alvarez, good evening, who is here live in the studio. Laura, good evening. You founded your practice in 2008, yep. A young international practice. And you worked with architectural firms all over, like Meccano, like Serge, Bentham Crowell, and also Carlos Ferrater. And now you are here. Are you stuck here, or are you still working all over the world today?
No, we are actually working all over the world. So we have actually more projects overseas than here in the Netherlands.
Even now?
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later. Because today we're talking about My Friend the Architect. And I really like that title because the association of architect and friendship is not that, I don't know, like something that comes natural or easy or something. It's an interesting expression of friendship, and also it says something about how you would like the architect to work and to shape the building process and also the buildings itself. The rustic expression, mi casa is tu casa, or my house is your house. And as architects, I think we never took that literally. Now, Adeola takes this familiar expression as an extension of the idea of friendship. She says, friendship, citizenship, and community are the practical grounds through which our ethics and their limits become real. These are the grounds on and through which we can construct a good life together. Therefore, friendship, citizenship, and community must be the concerns of architecture. So how does this idea appeal to you, Laura?
Yeah, it appeals very much to me. So I have a very similar approach toward architecture. So not so much just building trust towards citizenship, but also towards clients and towards the people with who I work.
Adeola, in your essay for the Dutch Architecture Yearbook, which will be published in a few weeks' time, you consider the practical ethics of being a Dutch architect. The question basically is, what does it mean to be a Dutch architect? And to pose this question is also to pose it within the context of the yearbook, which has, let's say, a few minor issues, because it's only about Dutch architects, it's about projects built in the Netherlands, and also it's about projects being actually built. So this yearbook, which has your beautiful essay in it, does not really reflect the ideas that are that you write down in your essay, because, well, building is a slow profession, and it takes some time maybe to digest all these ideas on how you could be an architect. So we are trying today to dig a little bit deeper in how this idea of friendship and architecture could fold out, could work. So we would like to hear more about how you are looking on this concept. You're an environmental psychologist, focusing on creative public engagement. You explored relationships between citizens, consumers, institutions and corporations, and also the environments they inhabit. And you have taught urban sociology, architectural design and social design at several universities, as well as a PhD in psychology. So So I would say you are the only person that could actually guide us through these principles of friendship, architecture, and social processes. So I'll give you a virtual applause, and then I'll give you the floor to explain better and more about the concept of the friend as an architect.
Great, thank you. I think the best way to start answering this might be to look at the beginning of how I got involved with the yearbook. So when I was contacted by this year's editors, the 2019-2020 Yearbook for Architecture in the Yearbook of Architecture in the Netherlands, I was contacted to write the guest essay, and usually one essay is featured in each year. And my first question was really, what does it mean to be a Dutch architect? After living and working in the Netherlands for 3.5 years and working both in the academic and the teaching of design and architecture, and also in the sort of design field, engaging with different design institutions and offices on projects and on presenting and thinking about design for the project, I was kind of confused a little bit about what it meant to be a Dutch architect who could be featured in the yearbook. Generally, what I found after looking at the past yearbooks and really talking to the editors about the concept, what emerged is a pattern in which Dutch architecture, despite being so global, is defined in somewhat narrow terms. It's about buildings that have been completed in 2019, 2020 in the given year. It's about architects who are Dutch, usually ethnically Dutch. So even though many architecture offices have very international staffs, the leaders of the offices tend to be Dutch, tends to be white, tend to be male. And so they tend to be featured as the main builders usually each year, or the people who are featured as the architects whose work is being recognized. And they tend to focus on objects that were completed in the Netherlands, despite the fact that many firms get a lot of their major projects and recognition by building internationally beyond the borders of the Netherlands. I mean, the Netherlands is quite small. I don't think the architecture industry could survive just by building in the Netherlands only, and by not being as international as it is. So the fact that the way that architectural trends are moving, the discourse in architecture is actually going in these days, is leading towards more transnational, international engagements across borders. And there are so many ethics that go with that. What does it mean to build in China? What does it mean to build in Kazakhstan? What does it mean to build in the United States, given the political realities of each of those countries? And what does it mean to be an architect who is based in the Netherlands, in international cities like Rotterdam or Amsterdam, who lives and works from the Netherlands, but may not actually be finding the recognition within the discourse of architecture in the Netherlands, which continues in speaking about it through instruments like the yearbook, seems to continue to leave out this really quite international, quite transnational reality of the architectural field and architectural discourse. So that's really what I wanted to think about. And that's the basis for why the article is titled Citizen Architect Friend, because I think that in order to actually work in the new ways that are necessary to really engage across borders and really engage with the transnational realities in the cities in which we live and work as designers, we have to be able to engage in a way that is, super professional. And for me, that includes bringing in the elements of the citizen, what it means to belong to a place or to relate to a place, the responsibilities and obligations of relating to others in the place that you build and work and live, and friendship. Right? I begin the essay with a quote from Aristotle that really, basically, to summarize, says, amongst friends, there's no need for justice. And if we have justice, then we have friendship. like real justice. So in thinking about the political and social and economic implications and even ethical implications of architecture, I thought that thinking of the architect between these two poles, between the citizen relationship to a place or lack thereof, and rights and obligations to a place, and the friendship, which is the kind of connection that can be generated through the work, the sense of empathy and the justice that is embedded within that kind of relationship, I thought was an excellent thing to talk about, especially in this particular moment. And when I wrote the essay, I was literally flying out of Milan as the city was locking down because of COVID-19.
And so mentioning Milan, so you tried to answer the question, what does it mean to be an architect in the Netherlands? And in your essay, you start with Aristotle, and then you go to Niger, and you go to Milan, and you go to Syria and Amsterdam and back. And I wonder, did you find a satisfying answer on the question that you started with?
I don't think I found an answer. I think that's an open question, really, that I'm posing to myself, and I hope that any designers, any builders, any architects who want to take that up will. But what I did find in sort of these travels and talking to the architects that I chose to feature, and just to be clear, I chose to feature in my essay architects whose work I feel impacted the Netherlands in the last year, and who are based in the Netherlands and working from there, even as they work on projects that go beyond the borders of the Netherlands. So what I found is that while all the architects I met and talked to, and the two that I feature in my essay, whose practices I feature, are very different, working in completely different continents and contexts, I actually found something in common between the practices that I find most interesting, which is the engagement with the levels of relationships, engagements with the design of relationships, a deep understanding that design and architecture really impacts lives of end users, and therefore requires a great deal of thinking about relationships within the work, engaging in relationships through the process of conceptualizing the work and bringing it to bear. And those are relationships with neighbors, with end users, with builders and constructors, relationships especially with the client. So in many ways, a lot of these architects, I think, are practicing what I would call relationship design, as opposed to simply object design. So there's a sense in which as they navigate these categories that I call citizen or friend within their professional lives, they're actually working from and establishing ways in their design to engender relationships, to bring about ways of thinking, working, connecting that were not there before. So they're often, and that's what I think it takes to work in that way, to work across borders and to make work that is really impactful, that is also locally impactful.
Adeola, could you give an example of that? You mentioned in your essay the Syrian architect, who came from Syria to Amsterdam and also to Zaanstad, I believe, to do the Zaanse huisjes architecture. What did strike you in the way he worked connecting to both Syria and the Netherlands?
Okay, so you're referring to the work of Bengin Dawood, who is an architect based in the Netherlands. I think since about 2013 or so, he's lived in the Netherlands. I hope I'm right about that date. And he worked already as an architect in Syria and watched the cities that he loved and lived be destroyed by war. He also started following the rebuilding process, even from here in Amsterdam. And one of the things that he started thinking about in his work was, what does it really take to rebuild a city after war? His research, his prior research before this recent war in the Netherlands, showed him that to rebuild neighborhoods that are destroyed by violence, by war, by environmental damage, is not simply to bring back individual structures or buildings. It's not just to bring back infrastructures as well. It's actually to bring back the relationships that the people have with the place. Whether it's, the smell of the bread that's always baking in the corner, whether it's the sound of the children who always play by in the park, by the lake in the park. All of those things are part of the sense of belonging, of home, of citizenship. So to be an architect in that context, for him, he realized he had to start not just looking at structures, not just looking at building typologies to bring back. He had to start talking to people about events and moments of destruction that were for them quite traumatic. So he had to start listening to stories, bringing out difficult stories, and drawing from those stories, literally drawing his plans from the stories of people's memories, not simply from the pre-existing structures that were there. Because more than simply bringing back the structures, it was important to bring back the memory and bring back the connection to place. And to do that, he was often working with people who were displaced, whether they be in refugee camps, people who might still be afraid to speak about their stories due to retaliation. So he developed a very interesting method. And in doing that, he realized that this is not just applicable to people who are in Syria, in cities that are facing war. This is applicable to his neighbors in Amsterdam, to people who have to face, I don't know. I mean, I think he lives in Amsterdam West, and there was a big drama recently about removing, I guess, bike lanes and putting in car parking in some of the quite busy streets or neighborhood streets in Amsterdam West. And, he was able then to recognize the sense of dispossession and the sense of displacement that people felt there. And even though it's nothing like what people face in terms of going to a refugee camp after a war, people certainly felt as emotional as if, we won't have space for our bikes anymore. These cars are coming. So he started using that same method to draw out people's connection to place, people's stories, and to apply his skill as an architect to help them develop an alternative plan with which they could go to the municipality of Amsterdam. Yeah.
Before I turn to you, Laura, just one final question for you, Adeola, before and we will talk about it more later, of course, in your joint conversation. When you talk about architecture and about the forming of relationships, it's also about kind of openness, a kind of transparency, a way to connect. Do you think in Dutch architecture, the general Dutch practice is open to that kind of relationships?
Well, honestly, I would say less so. I think that there are particular younger architects and certain branches of large architectural offices that are trying to take up what it means to be part of community, what it means to engage with people, and what it means to engage in participatory practices or transdisciplinary practices. But quite frankly, the history of planning, design, and architecture in the Netherlands has really been very much top down. So it's not part of architectural training in schools. It's not part of professional practice, of typical professional practice, to really engage on the ground locally. People work with their clients, whether those clients be the government, the municipality, or whether they are private clients, and try to meet those needs. But they are not necessarily engaging more directly with end users. There, again, as I said, there are some offices that are starting to engage in research practices that are, again, more exploratory, more participatory, more focused on, again, end users, political situations, and so on, and on shaping the discourse of the plan. But in reality, unfortunately, it's still a quite top-down field that focuses on technocratic expertise rather than on generating joint and community knowledges and working from there in the design.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this starter of the conversation. And what a good moment to turn to Laura, because having heard Adeola's comments and thoughts on being an architect in the Netherlands, do you feel like you are born in Spain, you've worked and lived in Mexico, you've building assignment commissions in the USA, in Portugal, I think even in Estonia or Eastern Europe kind of places. Exactly. So do you feel like a Dutch architect, or do you feel like an architect in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I don't feel a Dutch architect. I think it's not easy to feel Dutch when you are not Dutch. But I am very happy having an office in the Netherlands. And I very much identify with the story of Adeola about what is actually being a Dutch practice. So I am a proven example of the offices that are not really visible under the Dutch radar. So I am foreigner myself. I am very small, but we do actually quite large projects in places like Mexico. We have a very big project also in Portugal, some projects in Spain, in California. And actually these projects, I think I wouldn't be able to do it in the Netherlands because as a small office, you don't get so easily the trust of a client or a municipality, because you have to prove a lot of things that you cannot prove because you have never built before. So so I'm very happy to be able to combine like the projects that we do here in the Netherlands with other projects that that make me have a bit more impact in architecture.
But it's also one of the reasons that you started your own practice, because you came from large offices. Did you experience the lack of openness or responsibilities that were given to you that made you start your own office?
I did. What I did experience is that by being a foreigner, I speak Dutch and everything, it was very hard to work within Dutch offices in Dutch assignments, because you as a foreigner you always put like in foreign projects. So I really wanted to change that. So I started my office in 2008 to really experience what it's to build in the Netherlands and to see what can be my impact. And actually when I started my office, I got a very big slap in the face. I started of course in 2008, which was the worst year to start an office. But I won actually one of a very big competition that it was to rebuild the School of Architecture in Delft, so I thought yes, that would be my start in the architectural world, but it didn't happen, and probably it's because I was very young and not experienced enough to have done partnership with a bigger office. But I realized that my place was not just in the Netherlands. I realized very, very early that if I wanted to be happy with my profession, I should just look to different fields where I could really express myself. And then some opportunities came in overseas, also in Spain. We are also building some projects in Spain and Portugal. We won a European.
You brought some pictures and projects to show.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk us through some of the projects to give us an idea of what your work is about and what it looks like and where.
Well, this is one of the projects in Mexico. Well, we've been 5 years working in these projects and still not built, but actually all the projects we are doing in Mexico, they come from the same clients. So we have built an enormous trustful relationship. I never have had a contract with him, which is something that some people would get scared. But we've been 5 years working. This is one house in Spain. It's a holiday home that you really feel at home, a holiday house where you really feel at home in the north of Spain. But like, for example, the Mexican project, so because there is this big trust when the client really trusts us, we managed to change very often either the design brief or to improve the space, because at the end of the day we just want to make people's life a bit nicer. So we always try to take the maximum of each project. Like, for example, the picture it was before, it's the design brief was to do actually a shopping mall with offices on top, but we decided to change it and to have this. Because it's a Culiacan, it's a very car-oriented city, so we wanted people that they leave the car, they first go to these squares, and from the square you just go to the shops or to the offices. But there is no direct connection from the parking to the offices, so you always have to go through this square. So you have to change paths in order to activate this space. So this means a huge effort for a client because it means that it's much less efficient, the building. By creating these patios, you create much more facade, it's much more expensive, but you add a huge quality in the public space by acting differently. So, and I think you can only really get this when you have these really strong relationships with clients. And for example, Adeola focus a lot on the relationship with citizens and architects, but we are actually citizens, architects, and clients. This triangle is really, really important, either regardless if the client is a municipality or is a private client, it doesn't matter. So that's...
And I was wondering about this project, because it's actually a good example also of how you want to work as an architect.
Yeah,
the slide is there, so take the chance.
Like a break that it's still hurting a bit my heart because it's a close competition that we lost. But I wanted to give it as an example of something that we are very much confronted in the Netherlands. That is to design a shell, to design a facade. So it was a competition where it was a competition for homes for artists with dementia. So a very specific group. So you need to really think about how the house works because, I mean, it is a very important, it's not just about the facade. But we got a floor plan that it was supposedly already like based on the design brief. And when we started with the competition, we realized that this floor plan was not really fulfilling any of the needs of a house for dementia. So we decided to change the floor plan. And at the end, we actually got disqualified from this competition because we made it bigger. It was still within the square meters possible. But I mean, like, and then you think like, is this where architects, is this where, the direction of architecture? Because it's empty architecture. So it's, and this happens very often, especially with housing projects and housing corporations.
And is that, for example, why you started to work on the Molenwijk project in collaborations and in finding or creating communities?
I started in Molenwijk because I wanted to work more with the end user. Because this is, for example, for a housing corporation, but it is very difficult to work with the end user in this kind of projects. And Molenwijk was actually a sort of result of a research about post-war neighborhoods and about what is why it is so difficult to engage people, that people use the public space, that they feel safe, that they feel home. And it was like the idea of this research was to create these in-between spaces where people could interact more with each other. So it started as a research and it ended up in a very participatory project where we were going like every Tuesday. Last year we were every Tuesday in the neighborhood, and this year we are going to be every 2 weeks. Tomorrow we start actually with one workshop, and we are working like one-to-one with people in the neighborhood. So really listening to them, trying to understand what they want. It's not so much about that they design, but that they understand what are the possibilities, and that they try. I mean, that we together manage to extract what they really want for the neighborhood.
Yeah. Adeola, one of the things you and Laura have in common actually is this Molenwijk project. I think you did it before, you worked there before Laura did. Maybe it was even in consequence that you started after Adeola departed or left. Sorry. What did you do in Molenwijk, and how did that? Can it be seen as an example of the architect as friend?
Well, what I did there is I worked there before the Molenwijk workplace or workplaats was in existence. I guess my contribution there was actually with my students, actually in creating the concept of the place, the idea that such a place should exist. So I think I should just say briefly how the project was developed. So in my tenure at the University of Amsterdam in the sociology department, one of my specialities was in teaching methods for urban research and design. And one of the ways that I advanced such projects with my master's students was by connecting with local organizations that were interested in making interventions into the design, in some aspect of the urban cultural experience. It was through that I met, through my interest in that I met Josine Pieterse, who is one of the directors of Framer Framed, which is an organization that began and opened, and I think still runs, the Molenwijk workplace. Mm-hmm. When she came to me from Amsterdam North, I invited her to my office, and I think you have some images of that, but I invited her to my office along with her team to meet with myself and others of my colleagues who already do research in Amsterdam North to help her understand what the environments were. So, these are some of my students actually working on the Molenwijk proposal and projects. These were also, just to speak about international group, that group contained a British person, a German, and a Dutch person all working together on their research into the Molenwijk community. But what Framer Framed wanted to understand was how to engage culturally, because they are a cultural organization, arts organization, how to engage with that community. They wanted people from that community to be able to come to the waterfront in Amsterdam North, where they have their gallery, to come and visit. But they were noticing that they were not getting people from further into Amsterdam North, people from a community like Molenwijk. And our suggestion, or my suggestion, was to actually ask the question: what is the public life? What is the arts life? What is the community already doing over there? And is there a way for an organization like Framer Frame to actually provide something to that community? So rather than them coming to your gallery, why not think about going there? But to do that, we wanted to do a spatial research about what could be the impact, what could be the possibility of a cultural organization starting there, or what kind of cultural organization is actually needed. So with the team of about 25 of us, including my students, working in teams on 7 different projects, from the experience of elderly people to the experience of young men, young women, teenagers, children, the actual spatial environment, the cleanliness, the use of the spaces. There were many visits there, many observations, and there was a research fair which invited people from Molenwijk to come to the University of Amsterdam to look at the initial research and to reflect with us on this. Mm-hmm. After all of that process, the students ended up presenting the final findings and their recommendations to some residents of Molenwijk and the municipality, the cultural arm of the municipality in Amsterdam North that is responsible for the cultural programming in that part of Amsterdam North. And in this presentation, which you saw some pictures of it, they actually presented what their findings were, which is that the problem in Molenwijk is not actually structural. The buildings are from 1968 or so, more or less, and they're still great. These are some pictures of the research fair with people actually looking at and giving feedback about our initial ideas about the place and what's needed there culturally. But basically their findings was that the neighborhood is actually fine. The infrastructure is fine. The problem that they found was perception. The sense that there's division between how the elderly white Dutch people view the area versus how the younger families of non-white Dutch people, Moroccan Dutch people, Surinamese Dutch people, Ghanaian Dutch people actually experience that place, and what are the options available for the younger families and teenagers versus the options available for the elderly. So what we recommended was that they actually find space to create what would ostensibly be a headquarters of a community cultural programming center that would actually be fueled by the desires of the community, by the interests of the community, starting first with the celebration of the 50 years of the Molenwijk. Just as they were celebrating 50 years of the Bijlmer in the same year, the Molenwijk project, which was started in the same year as the Bijlmer, was forgotten. So we wanted to actually start by having a cultural center that could work with artists, connect with the local community, be driven by local demand to actually document people's experiences and generate a public cultural life that would connect with what people were already doing and experiencing there. Yeah. And so from there, 1 year later after our presentation, opened the Werkplaats Molenwijk Werkplaats, with the idea to invite artists, designers, architects like Laura to participate with the people there.
Yeah, and Laura, so by the time that you entered Molenwijk, there was this structure, this organization, these networks. There were the findings of Adeola and her team on what the problems were and how the different cultures, inhabitants, residents that live there, from the non-white or the white Dutch elderly people and the non-white younger people and families, how they could connect, how to find kind of a cultural maybe connection, or to find a kind of a similarities or ways to the platforms to talk or to experience things together. What kind of architectural tools could you bring in to start this process or to?
Yeah, so this is a very long-term process, and that's actually, I think, why most of these projects, they fail, because they are always seen as one-year projects. So architecture as a business is always very slow, but I think these kind of projects, they are even slower. So what you need is a continuity, and what has been happening in Molenwijk is that there's a lot of people coming and going. Like there is somebody doing like one research, and then there comes somebody from the municipality to do another research, and then I came also. And actually, the good thing is that I really could collaborate, for example, with Frame a Frame. So it was not just like me coming again to ask neighbors what they need. So what I tried when I came to Molenwijk is to first to know what is already done. And yeah, I saw this research of Adeola. I work a lot with Frame a Frame in some workshops. I work a lot with Molenwijk Kamer, that is voluntaries, how do you call it? Like voluntary people that that they run plays where they organize activities.
Social workers.
Exactly. Yeah. So I work a lot actually with the Alliantie, that is the main owner of the blocks of Molenwijk. So I tried actually to work already with people that was in the neighborhood, because they're especially with people that have been for a long time in the neighborhood. Also with SPIN, that is an organization that works with children, and then to try from that point to understand what can you do. For example, we did...
What can you do?
Yeah, so we did, for example, a very small intervention in the entrance of a flat, together with the people that were living there. So we thought together, what do you need? Because are these kind of places that are like don't belong to anybody, that are always dirty. So if you just improve them a bit, then people would take a bit more care of it, and they are still looking very nice. So they put even like books themselves and plants. So I think you can do very like little by little things. And I totally agree with Adeola, is that it's been, like most of the interventions, they are still very top down. And now actually we are now running a new project in Molenwijk that is together with the municipality. And the municipality is like financing like the interventions we are going to do, and we are doing the participatory part that is financed by Stimuleringsfonds. And so in this project, they are really willing to do a bottom-up project. And I mean, it's a lot of struggle for them, because they are very used to do top-down. So to listen to people, this project is about that neighbors decide what they want in the neighborhood. But sometimes in the meetings we have with the municipality already has ideas about what the neighbors should have. And we always have this kind of discussion of, but if people don't want that, so you have to listen to people.
but you as an architect, do you use models to get people talking, or do you walk around the city? What do you do to extract this kind of information that you need to make a home that actually feels like home?
It depends a lot. So we do very visual workshops. We work a lot with models because a lot of people in the neighborhood, they don't speak Dutch or English or any language. So actually we have two neighbors that we understand each other and we don't talk any common language. So we do everything very graphical. Like for example, for tomorrow we have prepared a model like this size where we will do a very interactive workshop to understand what people use in the neighborhood, what are the favorite places. So like in a very sort of like interactive way.
So you get to know them. You build this trust that you talked about earlier, and then what happens architecturally speaking.
Yeah. So for me, for example, this project is not so much about just the architecture; it's about the whole process and very much. Whereas by other projects, for me, the end result is also very important. In this one, what is important is that people are listened and that they are able to express what they want for the neighborhood and that they engage with the neighborhood. But also I think the task of the municipality is to listen to these people. Like, for example, like there are like a group of people that are very not listened to so far, that is the young kids of the neighborhoods, and the municipality really want them to be engaged. But these people just want a place to hang out, for example. But the municipality sees it already as this can create problems in the neighborhood. So therefore, this will never happen. And so this trust, so a way of changing things, if you don't trust, you will never be able to change. Because, you can provide them with another type of infrastructure, but if they want just to hang out, there is nothing wrong with hanging out. Of course, there are people that hang out in a bad way, but hanging out is not wrong.
So maybe it's also in the process of talking, getting to know each other, that our kind of tolerance, etc., or kind of understanding occurs, which makes it easier for, let's say, the Dutch white elderly couple and the people of color, or the American people that are working there or playing there or living there.
Yeah, but that's a very tough. I think that's a very, very tough task, and that's why I think the more you work in the neighborhood, the better it is, because the more people they know you, the more trust relationships you create, and the more open are people towards expressing what they need. But the clashes between this, I think it's a pity, but it is like this. So the all white people and the rest, which I wish it would be solved like this. It's not easy.
And Adeola, so all your advice seems to be taken into to the next level, into practice, and Laura is working on it. Is this how you envision the Molenwijk to develop? Is this how it should be, or do we need more or different things as well?
Well, I think that, again, the same issue goes to the question of the engagement with the community in the Molenwijk, as it goes to the earlier question about what is considered Dutch architecture in the yearbook, and how do we actually approach what can influence Dutch design practice. And that is a question of really, how do we engage with the other? How do we perceive what we consider the other? And how do we think of what we consider Dutch? Part of the issue often with working with the municipality or the housing cooperatives, corporations, is that they tend to perceive as their main client or the main sort of user. They tend to center a particular they tend to center a particular kind of person. And in particular, in that neighborhood, the municipality has engaged a lot. When they have engaged a lot with one segment of the population, namely the older Dutch residents, as opposed to, for example, the youth that require the space to hang out, who are classified as hang-a-youngeren. So for as long... Sorry.
Let me ask you a question, because you've both worked in quite a lot of countries, working on issues like this or similar issues. How would you assess the possibilities of inclusiveness in the Netherlands compared to, for example, other countries that you've been to, like Mexico City, or maybe like in Portugal, the project you did? How can you describe the differences, for example?
Yeah, I think, well, it's a very difficult, it's a long topic. Well, first of all, I don't like I don't like the word inclusive, because when you include something, means that something gets out of what you include. So there is always somebody that is not
everything.
Yeah, but then there's always a border. So there's always somebody gonna be out. I like more like.
So what's the word you prefer then?
Open. Like Richard Sennett, he used the word open city, which I like it more than inclusive, because it's, well, but what I think is, like, you have to be open to different types of people. And I think it's very difficult in the Netherlands that, for example, for me, it's very striking that people that are born here in the Netherlands and they are not from origin Dutch, they don't feel Dutch. Even talking with these guys in Molenbeek, they were referring to Dutch people, and I said, "Yeah, but you are also Dutch." No, I'm not Dutch. And I was thinking, like, this doesn't happen in all the countries, and that's the base that we have to change. How everyone that is Dutch feel Dutch, and I think until we don't change this, until we don't change the base, there is nothing to do. So,
and where does it start, this change?
I think the schools.
The schools.
Schools. They should be more mixed. I think that's for me.
Let's check with Adeola in Mexico City. Let's first talk about the word inclusiveness. Laura says, I don't like it. I prefer the word open. How do you feel
There is a place where I think inclusiveness works, and I think inclusiveness works with leadership. So one of the things that I work with design firms, and I work with municipalities, I work with different people involved with design leaders, to think about what it actually means to be inclusive as an effective form of leadership. And that means actually understanding, because it has to do with power, because, Laura just pointed out that someone always gets included. So it's necessary at the top levels. This is one place where I think this is a top-down issue. It's necessary at the top levels to actually think about who is not at the table. That is actually what it means to be inclusive. To think about who actually has been excluded is what it means to be inclusive. And that is actually the job of people who are in decision-making positions and who have been placed into such positions. So to compare a little bit with Mexico City, which I love, one fundamental difference is that the city necessarily has to be open because about 60% of the city is informal structures, informal buildings, like many Latin American cities. Most people don't work with architects. Most people work in and live in the places they made with their own hands, with the materials that they were able to access around them. Many people have researched this, but the phenomenon would be called autoconstrucción, or auto-construction, self-constructed areas. And self-constructed areas are a large part of what the city is and who lives here. So necessarily, in many ways, the government has to think about, decision makers have to think about people who are in the informal building sector. So it makes for a very different, environment when so many of the structures are just people building them themselves as they want to, and then dealing with the consequences of that, and then the city having to respond to what people have built and figuring out ways to provide and serve such people. That necessarily absolutely demands inclusive leadership. It absolutely demands that, because the people have already built it. So now you have to take it to consideration in some way in terms of the future of the city. The difference with the Netherlands is that, of course, as all the structures are decided and planned from the top down, there's very little place for people to interject their own construction of the place. One of the things I like about Laura's project in the Molenwijk is that it does allow places for people to start to redesign or place some design ideas into the public space. And while I don't think autoconstruction in poor circumstances is the best solution for everyone, we do see this trend happening more and more in Amsterdam to some degree, and other cities around, for example, in Almere Oosterwold, where people are taking on the act of building themselves and building their own homes. So there's a sense in which some form of self-construction, some form of interjection into the future of design, especially for housing and homes, it requires people who just want to have and need to have more of a say about that, especially in this post-COVID type of world that we're living in. So in order to accommodate that, the leadership decision makers will definitely have to practice inclusivity in a way that they do not. We'll have to open up that sense of top down. Because even building in Amsterdam, anyone who builds their own home in Amsterdam or is involved in a CPC or in a self-constructed group will tell you that one of the most difficult thing is to deal with the regulations of the building regulations.
So
of
Laura, I see a lot of recognition in the way you in your gestures and how you not react to it. How do you?
I think it's a really good point. I think because for example in Spain or Mexico and other countries where I work, it's much less ruled, and therefore people can find their spaces easier because you always can do it. It's just you can just I don't care what the government does. I just do it like this, and you always it's true that you always have people manage to find their way of doing or the way of living by not following any rule, and of course it results in many occasions as chaos as a city. But it's true that it's much more appropriating the public space or the territory, whereas here it's even all these auto constructions that Adeola is mentioning is it says that how much there's the maximum height, the maximum width, so at the end it ends up being everything exactly the same, but in a different facade. For example, if you go through Amsterdam North, which are all self-constructed, but at the end is all of them the same. So it's it's these slightly variations that make people feel that they took decisions, but it's still very ruled.
Is that also what you're trying to do in Molenwijk? Because if you want to get away from rules and structures and how things are arranged, then you're looking for a degree of informality, probably.
Yeah, that's actually our project originally was called looking for the in-between space. So it's actually looking for these spaces for informality, because it's either you have or the private domain or the public domain, but there is nothing in between. So we wanted to do these interventions, and it's really hard because you have to go anyways through the procedure of building permits, and just something that you want to place in the public space has to fulfill all the rules of that it cannot break and it has to be, it's very, very difficult to do something informal if it's not approved by the municipality. So now the good thing is that in this part that we are doing, the municipality is really willing to change the way they do, and it's been so far very nice. So we have met many times through meets and online, and so tomorrow we start with the first workshop. So I'm very curious about how this new project is going to develop, and I hope that a lot of neighbors will come. So we have no idea. Maybe we are alone tomorrow.
So forming relationships, creating some kind of informality is important for the architect to be able to be a friend. But you also mentioned education. So let me check on Adeola, because if you mentioned that the most important thing to promote and to stimulate inclusiveness is to start with good leadership, inclusive leaderships, which needs to develop a sense of awareness of who is not at the table, as you mentioned. How can schools or education play a role in that, in your opinion?
Well, I think in terms of architecture education and design education, one of the things I try to instill into my students and into the projects, including the projects that came to Molewijk, is to start learning how to ask that question. Of the client, is to start learning different ways of engaging with the client. So I talk about with the students relationship design and start to introduce that as an element of professional practice, how to design relationship with clients, how to think about end users, what are ways to establish relationships. These are things that I work with and try to teach and talk about with designers in practice. In terms of practical education, another concept that I work with a lot, or that I would say that I kind of made up this concept, is called the shadow client. So I learned in my own working, I always think I have a client, but then who is not there is also probably my client as well. So who is my shadow client? Who is not there? So I try to think about how do you actually bring into the conversation or include in a conversation what cannot be at the conversation, who cannot be there, and what cannot be said, and actually include that in the negotiation. In some ways, I would say that from everything I hear about what Laura is doing at Molewijk, she's working with both relationship design and the idea of the shadow client, in the sense that she's actually in her conversations with the municipality, which is leading to the event that they're going to have tomorrow, starting to advocate for, in that conversation with her clients, advocate for the other people who are not there, the end users or the young people whose voices are often never heard at the table. So there is a way, I try to teach designers that there is a way to be an inclusive leader by engaging in the circumstance even with what is excluded, with what is not allowed to be there. And that's the way of being inclusive, right? Mm-hmm. So another way that I do that is I think that leadership really does need to be retrained. Leadership in design, leadership in architecture really does need to learn again. They need to go back into a mode of learning how to engage with a changing society and how to engage with a future that is going to require a lot more autonomy, a lot more self-constructed lives. So I work on that with them. Yes.
Adeola, to elaborate a bit on that, how to start to engage, to ask the questions, to form the awareness, to be more aware also of the shadow client, as you mentioned it. How do you teach your students, and then I'll ask the same question to you, Laura, later. How do you teach your students these new tools, these kind of inclusive tools?
Well, in this case, to give the perfect example of the Molewijk, and you saw some of the pictures of them working, the main way I think is to start to engage, to initiate projects that don't already exist. So rather than architecture education simply ending with, or design education simply ending with a plan, with a proposal, with a presentation, but actually to encourage people to get out there and start actually working in projects that require coalition building. So it's one thing to educate architects and designers to think about, I want to build my skyscraper, so I'm going to design my skyscraper, and I'm going to design the circulation, and I'm going to, develop all of, the 100 A4s that people present in their thesis presentations. It's another thing to say, even something as small as a community center or a community cultural organization like the Workplaats Molewijk. Well, actually, how can you bring that into fruition? Who will need to be involved? Well, you need to go to Molewijk. You need to knock on doors.
Let us ask Laura about that, because you're using the same tools that Adeola is advocating at the moment. Or how do you make sure that the tools you develop and the lessons you learn, that they stick not only in Molewijk, but also maybe through the people that work at your office, or maybe to architecture students? Is there a way for you to to teach your findings?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, through university. So I also teach in Amsterdam sometimes and Delft, and I think that's one way. But I think I hope that after this project, that the municipality understands also the importance that is to have this continuous project. Like, I don't think that you can just teach it. I think it requires that this project, if I leave, that most probably I will leave in 1 year, that there is somebody that is taking over and that continues in the same way. Because otherwise all this work is for nothing. So you cannot just stop and have a new project. Yeah. It has to continue.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We're at the end of the program, so I have to close it. Thank you, Adeola, for sharing your knowledge and your stories. Thank you, Laura, for taking us along your practice and the way you work and your findings all over the world. Next week, we're back with the second edition, which is called Stories as Fundament. So that will be more about shared past and shared futures. And we will do that with Kirsten Hannema and Jörg Auburg. And if you want to see more like these kind of programs, please pay as you like, because we definitely need it. And I hope you enjoy the evening. I'll see you next week. Bye bye. Thank you.